Our friend John Solomon has a follow-up to his blockbuster as it relates to Joe Biden and Ukraine. He joins us along with attorney David Schoen and Greg Jarrett. By the way, next week, Greg's new book is out. Get an early copy now at Hannity.com, Amazon.com. Witch Hunt, the story of the greatest mass delusion in American political history. John, another blow up in their face. This has been like the Mueller report blew up in their face. Yeah. Corey Lewandowski blew up in their face. The secret Washington Post whistleblower story, that's about to blow up in their face again.
Yeah, listen, this has a lot of the hallmarks of the Russia collusion narrative, how it rolled out, the same people, right, the Adam Schiffs of the world, anonymous leaks, conversations that are, with world leaders, or much like Mike Flynn's conversation being leaked, which turned out there was no illegality in that conversation. I think everybody should take this as a grain of salt, and as we learned in the Russia case, wait for the facts, because I think the facts are going to be a lot different than the
well, I was told directly by people that know. My sources have said that there's nothing in there that the president would be concerned about. Nothing. Is that what you've heard?
Let's take one that we can debunk. We can debunk one right now. Here's one of my favorite narratives that, sounds great until you find out what really is going on. For the last few days, the media has been saying, oh my God, Rudy Giuliani had contacts with the Ukrainians. All he was trying to do was get political dirt from the Ukrainians to affect the 2020 election, get something on Joe Biden, bring it back here, help Donald Trump win the 2020 election. And the specific contact that's raised concern was in the summer of this past summer, July, he had a contact with an official with the new Ukrainian president, Zelensky. Sounds great. Sounds salacious, right? When you hear it, here's the only part of the story you haven't heard. And when you hear it, it changes everything you know. Rudy Giuliani didn't have that contact because he wanted to have it. The State Department, not one, but two senior officials at the State Department called Rudy Giuliani and asked if it would be okay if he would talk to President Zelensky's aide and smooth things out, have a conversation, create a good relationship, because it would help the State Department. That contact occurred in July. Rudy Giuliani then agreed to meet the Zelensky advisor in early August. And you know what Rudy Giuliani did after that? He didn't carry out a dirty trick. He went back to the State Department and briefed two senior officials, two senior ambassadors, on exactly everything that went on. It was a diplomatic mission urged by the State Department, not a political dirty trick like CNN, the New York Times, and others have tried to portray it over the last couple of days. It's that lack of facts in this reporting that should make us all pause and say, wait, we might be being sold another bill of bad goods.
Well, let's go back to what we know about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden leveraging American tax dollars to get the investigator into Hunter Biden's shenanigans over there, as it relates to oil and gas. By the way, did Hunter Biden ever have any background? Did he do any work that we know of prior to this deal with Ukraine that paid him an awful lot of money, which we'll get into in a second? Did he have any background to make these kind of deals before, or no?
He did not. And the overture that he got so concerned his business partner that Hines, the stepson of John Kerry, immediately told the State Department, I'm not going to be part of this. I don't feel good about this. I'm not part of this. That tells you something. When the guy who could make money off it decides he doesn't want to be part of it, it's suspect, even to Hunter Biden's own business partner. John Kerry's son dropped out of this deal in Ukraine because he didn't want to be part of it, even though he was in business with Hunter Biden. So, no, he didn't. A lot of money flowed, $3 million according to FBI records. And then questions began to arise. Isn't this a conflict of interest? Hunter Biden's working on Ukraine, making lots of money. Why Joe Biden is overseeing the Ukraine portfolio for Barack Obama. That's a legitimate public interest.
So what exactly did Hunter Biden do so we can bring everybody up to speed?
Well, he was a board member, and he also was consulting at the same time. He was a board member.
He was a board member of?
Burisma Gas Holdings, which was a Ukraine natural gas company run by a former minister of the environment of Ukraine. And so he gets hired in 2014, right as the revolution's occurring and Joe Biden is taking over the Ukraine portfolio for the president. Hunter Biden suddenly gets this offer, and they start getting paid $188,000 a month flows into the firm that Hunter Biden controlled.
108
That's a big number.
100 and what?
88. $188,000 a month.
Now, how much did Hunter get of that?
We don't know, right? We see some deposits that come in and out. It's unclear how it was divvied up, but that much money flowed into his company.
And what company is it in America?
It's a firm out of Chicago called Rosemont Seneca Partners, and it had a subdivision that collected this specific money. And we know this not because the Ukrainian authorities have given us any records, but because the FBI seized these records in an unrelated investigation, put them into court file. I obtained them and I reported on them. So $3 million changed hands over 2 years.
And this is then the prosecutor in Ukraine was looking into the issue, and that's where Dada comes back into play. Again, he was overseeing the Obama administration's relationships with the Ukraine, and that's why Hunter was there, and this happened right after he'd been there. And as their prosecutor looks into a potential unethical quid pro quo with the Vice President of the United States and his son, that's when Sleepy, Creepy, Crazy Joe 30330 steps in and says, either fire that guy or I keep the $1 billion, and you can't stop me. And they fired the investigator that was looking into all of this. Greg Jarrett, you put out a piece today called The Whistleblower May Not Be a Whistleblower at All.
Yeah, and of course the media would never know that because they've never opened a law book or bothered to just Google a statute. The statute's called the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Act, and it provides a process for somebody in the intelligence community to report misconduct or abuse within the intelligence community. So this complaint against the president has no application. The whistleblower does not qualify as a whistleblower because he's complaining about the president, who is not a member of the Intelligence Committee. Sure, the Intelligence Committee reports to the president, but he is not subject to its rules of conduct. And this is why the Director of National Intelligence said, we don't believe this is what's called a urgent concern complaint. It's not a whistleblower complaint under the law. We're not going to give it to you, members of Congress. What's disturbing is, we have an American spy in one of our own intelligence agencies who's apparently spying on the president. And then he thinks it's his job to second guess the motivation behind the words of the elected president, who is the most superior officer in the U.S. government.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you now saying that the same person, President Donald Trump, who was spied on as a candidate in a multitude of ways that we've exposed, and his transition team and his presidency, you're saying now that that our intel agencies, the ones that Chuck Schumer warned would get you 6 ways and Sundays if you dare mess with them? In other words, Chuck Schumer saying that the powerful tools of intelligence will be turned on you if you ever say anything they don't like, which is a scary proposition. Are you saying that you believe that the president was illegally surveilled and amassed by our intelligence community again?
Well, whether it was illegal or not, you don't know. But look, when the president makes a call with foreign leaders, there are other people in the White House who are listening in, but they do so with the permission of the president. The president's comments about this suggest that, well, he didn't know that this complainant, this so-called whistleblower, was listening in. So, but the media doesn't, with the exception of Phil Mudd at CNN, who said this is outrageous to be listening in on the president. This is outrageous to be a snitch at for Congress. Phil Mudd worked in the CIA, worked in the FBI, and
by the way, he's a huge Trump hater.
Yeah, he is. But in this one instance, he pointed out something that's incredibly important. So, the media mass hysteria is based on almost no information. But that doesn't stop journalists from convicting Trump in the court of public opinion and predicting his imminent
All right, let me go
again.
All right, quick break. And as we continue, Greg Jarrett, John Solomon, and David Schoner with us. If we have another case where they're spying and listening in on the President of the United States and then leaking it, David Schoen, that to me is a far bigger issue than the President saying he wants truthful information about maybe some illegal activities that were committed to influence our elections in 2016.
I think that's 100% right, and I think you may be looking at a situation God forbid, I guess, again, where we need a special prosecutor simply to look into this intelligence community issue. But let me say this. I think there's another big problem here also. Remember, the Constitution relegates foreign policy, dealing with ambassadors, dealing with foreign diplomats and heads of country exclusively to the president. So for Congress even to be, making their demands here raises the real separation of powers issue, but it also undermines the foreign policy of our country. This president was elected because he was an outsider, because he was a businessman, because he knew how to make deals. He trades on relationships. Every time they pull something like this, and they well know it, they undermine the relationships that he's developing. Look at the inroads he's made in foreign policy, even while under this whole Mueller fiasco. The foreign policy accomplishments he's made are tremendous. Nobody before ever made any inroads with some of these other countries, and now they criticize whatever road he takes. He has to be able to communicate effectively. The other thing I want to say, though, very important, I think, is this piece that John Solomon is reporting on is clearly a blockbuster. But, you said earlier, Sean, that it's another boomerang. There wouldn't be these boomerangs unless you were doing what you're doing. It is vitally important that you continue to report and expose on these issues.
Well, I've got to worry now, don't I? Because the intel community will get me 6 ways and Sundays and Solomon and Jared. And with all due respect, David, probably you too.
No, it's vitally important work. This is how our system depends on you continuing to do this work. It's not a coincidence they boomerang.
No, we're not going to have David, we won't have a country if our intelligence agencies are spying on our president illegally and they're unmasking and they're leaking raw intelligence, because that's what it sounds like it's a possibility. Again, stay right there. David Schoen, we have Greg Jarrett, we have John Solomon. We're going to continue our deep dive into this.
Sean Hannity, always concerned for our country, always honoring our servicemen and servicewomen, and standing up for liberty every day.
You actually referred criminal prosecution to the Department of Justice for Comey, correct?
We're required by the IG Act to send information that we've identified that could plausibly be criminal to the department, and
that's pretty monumental. Do you know of any FBI director who in the past has ever had a criminal prosecution?
I wouldn't know as I sit here today.
Or any other head of any federal agency?
I do, actually, but I'll keep that.
All right, and the same type referral applied to McCabe as well.
Right. The IG Act requires me to expeditiously report to the Attorney General when I see evidence that could be considered criminal, and we follow the law.
We've taken now your report, and we've put it side by side. Congressional testimony that James Comey made before the Joint Oversight and Judiciary hearing, and I'm finding just a number of irregularities. So would it be appropriate if Ranking Member Jordan and I were to refer those inconsistencies to the IG, and if we did that, would the IG look at those inconsistencies? So at this point, can you rule out the fact that there will be any criminal referrals as it relates to this new FISA abuse report that is coming out? Can you rule that out?
I'm not going to speak to that issue one way or the other.
All right, that was the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz. It's gotten very, very little play in the fake news media mob. Why? Because it doesn't fit their narrative and exposes what we have been telling you, which is 2.5 years and, well, now really longer than that, of pushing lies, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories, the biggest hoax, as Greg Jarrett calls it, the biggest mass delusion in American political history. And it goes on from there. And in the process, the slander, the libel, the besmirchment, the character assassination is never ending. And it's sort of like a quickening. Art Bell once wrote about the quickening, meaning that things happen faster. Now they get exposed faster. Claims on CNN by, I guess, that Trump has killed millions more than Mao, Stalin, and Hitler combined. Not one bit of pushback, but I think my IFB was not working that night. Or just the latest in what is a series of scandals, including their anti-Semitism and tweets that are unbelievable on 9/11, and tweets about the great revolutionary Mao, Forget about the millions of people that starved to death and were slaughtered. We won't talk about that. It's the New York Times, the paper of record, bragging about they used an entire newsroom to work on only one story, but the story didn't turn out the way they thought it would, and they were exposed for lying. Now they're exposed for lying again, as we saw this week about Justice Kavanaugh, keeping out the key detail that the woman that is the alleged victim that they're writing about doesn't recall any such incident with Judge Kavanaugh. But a third-party political hack, apparently, that worked with Clinton on the Lewinsky case with Williams and Donnelly and Connolly in 1998, that's going to be our source for that. Well, now we have Horowitz confirming to Congress that he, in fact, recommended a criminal prosecution, because that's what it is. They just say it is a referral. They don't say criminal referral, but that's basically what it is. And he even went on to justify that and to basically agree to investigate whether Comey also lied to Congress. He went into great, explanation that, we've identified things that plausibly would be criminal to the Department of Justice, and that is required by the Inspector General Act to send that information that they've identified that could plausibly be criminal to the Department of Justice. That's how he put it. But we're awaiting his report on FISA abuse, and it should be a slam dunk. We continue. John Solomon, investigative reporter. Greg Jarrett, his new book is out next week. Witch Hunt, the story of the greatest mass delusion of American political history. David Schoen, criminal defense civil liberties attorney. David, let me go to you. You watched Horowitz this week, and I saw a guy that was not going to whitewash anything about Jim Comey. And now that we know the FISA report is finished, it's been sent to the Department of Justice. Attorney General Barr will look at any possible needed redactions after the FBI Director Wray weighs in. I don't have a lot of confidence in the current FBI director. He's not shown any willingness to clean up the premier law enforcement agency in the world, which is very troubling to me because up till this point they've had the best reputation as well, and it's only a few and not the 99.9% that are great agents.
That's right. I mean, listen, I think Director Wray has been a disaster in a way. If you just look at the Roger Stone case, the idea of what happened to him with that raid, that's a whole other chapter here. It's outrageous, and he's never come clean about how that could have happened. But listen, I've been friendly with Michael Horowitz for over 25 years. I first met him in a case in the Southern District of New York in which he was brought in to clean up corruption among DEA agents. He had the guts to do it then. He's had the guts all along. It's a very difficult position he's in. Remember, his career path has crossed with Comey and all of these folks all along, but he still stood strong. I can tell you this, as a prosecutor, he never would have signed off on any of these FISA applications we've spoken about, and he would have fired any prosecutor who worked with him who omitted the kinds of credibility and reliability details that had to be on those applications. He's a man of integrity, and now you see McCabe attacking him. That's outrageous. McCabe's got nowhere to turn anymore, and neither does Comey, frankly. But I personally thought that Michael Horowitz could have been stronger in some of the IG reports that have been submitted already. That is, that I thought the acts of criminal conduct were even clearer and stronger than were reflected in there. But he's a solid, balanced guy. He's a person of integrity. Everybody likes who meets. And he's an honest man. And I consider it an honor to be his friend.
Your take now, John Solomon, and what do you expect?
So what I'm hearing is that the IG's report on FISA abuses is extensive, illuminating, and that some of the misconduct that has been identified in there, it goes beyond anything that we've talked about in your show or in my columns or in all the other great work that Greg and Sarah and Joe DeGenova and Victoria Tensing have worked on. It is comprehensive and it is eye-opening, according to some people who have seen it. Now, we've seen Horowitz make criminal referrals in his earlier investigations. The question will be, will there be criminal referrals related to the FISA findings? And as you saw from that clip that you just played, he was non-committal or he didn't tip his hand to Mark Meadows in that questioning. But I believe that this fall, the month of October particularly, is going to be a very illuminating month about how bad things were at the FBI, how wrong those FISA applications were, how misleading the Justice Department has been, not only to the FISA court, but to the American public. And I think the boomerang will complete its journey this fall. First step may be in the declassification of a small number of documents followed by the release of the IG report. I would expect that over the next 5 weeks.
And your take, Greg Jarrett, 5 weeks, oh my gosh, that's an eternity. When are we ever going to get this thing? And more specifically, Greg Jarrett, I'm not particularly inspired by the movement so far of Director Wray.
No, Wray should be fired. He has been obstructing Congress. He has been obstructing legitimate FOIA requests. But the reason this IG report is taking so long is that the level of malevolence and scheming against Trump is shocking and pervasive. Government officials went rogue and they tried to frame Trump for a collusion conspiracy that never existed. There was lying, there was spying. I expect most of it to be digested in the IG report, meticulously specified. There must be an accounting under criminal law, criminal referrals, and prosecution should ensue.
Okay, now the question is there any doubt that we now know the following, that Jim Comey, on at least 3 occasions that we know of, John Solomon, you reported on 2 of them. One was with Bruce Orr, when he warned everybody in August of 2016, don't trust Steele, this isn't verified, Hillary paid for it. Kathleen Kavlek did it, and apparently that was just, about 10 to 14 days prior to the signing of the first application for the first FISA warrant that Jim Comey signed. She warned everybody the same thing. From what we now know, the British government warned our government as well, about Christopher Steele. He's not to be trusted. And, from my sources, there's probably at least 2, if not 3 other warnings, direct warnings that were given to the DOJ and the FBI in particular. Now, with that said, that means it's premeditated. Now, we also know that, in fact, they never attempted to verify the Steele dossier. We also know it's unverifiable because its own author, had they even bothered to ask, said under oath in an interrogatory in Great Britain he had no idea if any of it was true. When the FBI, John, you wrote this column, eventually got around to verifying the dirty dossier, they were able to determine over 90% of it was not true. Probably 100%, but they weren't able to prove 100% wasn't true, but over 90. That means that they took an unverified Russian dossier full of Russian lies paid for by Hillary, and on a document where they swear that they verified it to be true, it became the bulk of information for the 4 applications. Now, the interesting thing to me is that would be premeditated fraud on a court. Greg Jarrett's identified many other crimes. I'll let him answer that in a second, John Solomon. Is there any way on earth that the Inspector General does not conclude that they were illegally obtained or obtained under false pretenses?
I don't think so. I'm not a lawyer, so I'll stick to the factual side of it. It has irrefutably been proven now that information in that FISA warrant from the first one through the 4th was inaccurate. It was unverified when posited as being verified to the court. And more importantly, evidence that weighed against the credibility of Christopher Steele was not submitted to the court, even though the FBI was in possession of it when they provided the first FISA. And I'll just give you one example that a lot of people forget about, and I think at the end of the day, one other thing I'll say, Christopher Steele himself may be the best evidence that Christopher Steele was warning the FBI his material was politically motivated. I think we're going to find that out, that Christopher Steele was being candid with the FBI, that he did have a political motive, that he did have a political client, that he had an election day deadline. I think that's going to be one of the revelations of the report, and the FBI kept that. But here's something that is the primary piece of evidence that they used to justify spying on Carter Page, the Trump campaign aide. They said they had verified that Carter Page had met with 2 senior Russian officials in July of 2016 in Moscow. Bob Mueller's report said those meetings did not occur. It is extraordinary that the primary piece of evidence he used to justify spying on a Trump campaign aide for 12 consecutive months turned out not to be true. That is the greatest failure that the FBI will have to own up to.
Quick break. All right, as we continue with Greg Jarrett, John Solomon, and David Schoen. Greg Jarrett, what are the crimes that were committed in all of this?
Perjury, false and misleading statements, obstruction of justice, fraud, conspiracy to defraud, deprivation of rights under color of law, electronic surveillance under cover of law, and contempt of court. You'll find it on page 101, chapter 3 of my new book, Witch Hunt. You can pre-order it now, but it goes through all of the 6 material ways that people like Comey and McCabe...
Well, go through it again. You said perjury, you said obstruction, you said fraud, you said misleading statements. Keep going.
Conspiracy to defraud, deprivation of rights under color of law, electronic surveillance under cover of law, and, of course, contempt of court. These are all crimes. They're felonies. And, you know, these judges were deceived in 6 material ways. And when the FBI kept getting more and more evidence that they had defrauded the court, the law imposes a duty. Go back to the court, advise the court. They didn't do that. So they compounded their fraud with more fraud.
Unbelievable. David, you agree with that analysis? You're an attorney.
Absolutely, and there's not only constitutional duty to go back, the rules of the court, Rule 13 of the FISA court, requires them to go back for any material omission or misstatement. Besides the crimes, there's also potentially private causes of action. Any aggrieved party, which means anyone overheard or the subject of this surveillance, ought to have the right to sue, quite frankly. But, you know, to put the whole thing in perspective, you know, nobody's guessing anymore about these. We know that these are facts. But is it a surprise when we now know, especially after the Mueller testimony, this was the Andrew Weissman special prosecution here. The idea that anyone would be surprised that Andrew Weissman is associated with the withholding of Brady material or credibility material or what we call Kyle's material that goes to something suspect in the investigation or the investigators, that's not a surprise to anyone, and it shouldn't be. And when his background comes out fully, then that ought to speak for itself, quite frankly. No surprises there. It's horrible. It's a horrible chapter in our history, but no surprises. This is where Mueller went wrong, and he knew Weissman was bad from the start. All right,
I got to let it go there. Thank you, all three of you.